It's really an interesting array of 10 classes that I think will lead students to those outcomes in a way that your grandpa's gen ed probably just can't do. You won't find another gen ed experience like this out there in higher ed. As a product of a really robust liberal arts education myself, I think this is like liberal arts 2.0. I think this is the nouveau liberal arts that we should be teaching our students to get them to the outcomes that I think they need and that employers really want.
That was Brad Fuster, Provost at San Francisco Bay University, where they're really reimagining higher ed from the ground up. We had a great conversation about the design and delivery of their new gen ed curriculum. It incorporates some of the most powerful aspects of a connected college: experiential learning across disciplines, industry engagement, the holistic integration of AI, all while increasing access and opportunity. Let's dive in. Welcome to the Connected College Podcast. I'm your host, Elliot Felix. I've helped more than 100 colleges and universities change what they offer, how they operate, and how they're organized to enable student success. And if you're a leader in higher ed and you think that the silos and separations get in the way of student success, then this podcast and my upcoming book, The Connected College, are for you. We're here to learn and work together to bust silos, question tradition, and forge partnerships so that students feel connected to their college, their community, their coursework, and their careers. Brad, welcome to the Connected College Podcast.
Thanks, Elliot. It's great to be here with you.
It's great to have you, and I'm so excited to dig into all the great stuff you're up to at San Francisco Bay University.
Yeah. It's been a wild year here, and I'm excited to jump in.
Tell us a little bit about how you got started in higher ed and what you're up to these days.
Yeah. So originally I was a music professor, started my career as a music professor. All three of my degrees are in percussion performance. I played with orchestras all over the world, recorded in Hollywood, and would tour with major orchestras. And then eventually I moved upstairs and became the chair of the department. And then just kept going, went through a string of interim roles, and then eventually landed as a provost of a small liberal arts college in upstate New York called Keuka College, very traditional liberal arts school. I was there for the last 6 years. And then just last year, made the move to the West Coast and joined the folks at San Francisco Bay University for a really interesting opportunity to restart a university from scratch. And so we're in this position where there really are no rules right now. And we have really tremendous resources to execute on our strategy. And we're not bound by the traditional things that, in many ways, hamper a lot of universities that are struggling right now.
It's really cool to pull all those experiences together. And I'm from upstate New York, Albany, so not exactly the Finger Lakes, but a cool spot and a cool transition to a new spot and to move upstairs.
Yeah.
I like it. How was that transition from faculty to administration?
Gradual. I feel like department chair, you have one foot on either side of the fence. And I was department chair at SUNY Buffalo State, now Buffalo State University, for about 9 years, from 2005 to 2013. I was chair, and so I didn't really consider myself administrator. I was still teaching a bunch. I was still playing, very much had my hands in the soil. There was a string of vacancies. I was interim chief enrollment officer and then interim chief information officer, and then eventually landed in the provost office as an AVP at Buffalo State. So it was probably when I got to the provost office that I realized I probably wasn't going back to music at that point, and got serious about what a career in full-time higher ed leadership would look like. But it was a painful transition because I started playing music as a kid, and you invest your whole entire life into your discipline and you love it, and it's really all you know. And the decision to sell all my percussion equipment and not renew my membership in the musicians union was a painful one. I actually wrote an article for Inside Higher Ed about this, because I feel like a lot of traditional academics that eventually land in leadership roles have some professional struggle, and there's some cognitive dissonance about letting go of your discipline and moving into leadership. I also think higher ed, not at San Francisco Bay, but at many institutions that I've personally worked at and know of, there is this kind of us versus them mentality, the dark side. You don't want to go over to
Right.
the side. So yeah, it's a mental struggle more than anything. But I feel like I'm really happy here. This is my new discipline, right? I read about this, I think about this, I talk about this every day, and I'm also in love with it because I can have an impact at a more profound level than I could as a professor.
Yeah. It's interesting the trade-offs we make between breadth and depth and scale and so forth. And the move upstairs affords you greater impact. Maybe you don't have as much or in-depth contact with students or your discipline. So I get that. I get how that could be a struggle, but it also seems having worn these different hats in a discipline, in enrollment, in the provost's office, like it gives you a much more holistic perspective. And I'm interested in your perspective on student success. Like, how do you, given all these different experiences, like, how do you define it?
Yeah. How to define student success is, I think, a constant conversation at many campuses. Before I answer, I'll say this. If you look at the outcomes nationally that higher ed's having, about 50% of the students who enter higher ed are graduating, which means about 50% are not graduating and they're leaving with sizable debt. And so this is a failing grade, right? A 50 on an exam is an F. And all these schools that are saying we're committed to student success and we put students at the center of our decisions and we're student centric really are not. If 50% or thereabouts of these students are being accepted, admitted, enroll, we take their money and then we leave them stranded. You would not get on an airplane that 50% of the time took your money and left you in some random airport.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's what higher ed is doing. For me, how to define student success is the highest possible percentage of graduates graduate with little to no debt. And they do it on time. They do it in a timely way. I don't know why we measure 6-year graduation rates for a 4-year degree. That means that students are leaving with 50% more debt and they're getting to the job market 2 years later. Only in higher ed does 6 equal 4.
Yeah, with opportunity cost too, right?
Opportunity
In
cost is huge.
those 2 years
Right.
or more. Yeah, and I think we still talk about how it's a good bet and it's a great driver for economic mobility, and you earn $1 million over your lifetime that you wouldn't without a bachelor's degree, but that is only for the 50 to 60%
That's right.
that graduate. So yeah, I hear you, and it seems like time for a fresh perspective, which you all are taking. I know you've just created a new gen ed curriculum, and I'm curious about that and the role that maybe that plays in helping your students succeed.
Yeah, yeah. So gen ed, at least for undergraduate students, is a tremendous component of student success. SFBU is working with our accreditor, WASC, to be one of the first schools on the West Coast to issue 90 credit undergraduate degrees, abbreviated undergraduate degrees. And when you break it down, really 30 of those credits are general education and 60 are content, major content. And so really a significant experience that all undergraduate students will get is the gen ed. And so our gen ed looked very traditional. When I arrived, it was the normal distribution model where you have a lot of disciplines that frankly look like high school to the student. You have social science, natural science, humanities, arts, writing, quantitative reasoning, and a variety of courses that the student can pick from to satisfy those categories. And then when they've taken enough, they are done. And I feel like it's a box checking exercise. It's something students want to, quote, get out of the way so that they can get into their major courses and their content, which is the real reason they're in college. And it's unfortunate. So what we did at SFBU is we developed this agility praxis pathway. There are 5 global outcomes of that. One is to be a tenacious leader. One is to be interpersonally gifted. One is to be a global navigator, a tech trendsetter, and an enlightened thinker. These are the 5 things that we want students to leave SFBU demonstrating. And we have behavioral indicators for each one of these, many behavioral indicators that we can actually measure as students are going through the curriculum. And the pedagogy is built on this philosophy of think, do, create. We really want students to have an experiential ride through this experience. We do not believe that students are empty vessels into which we pour content and knowledge. We want them up, we want them writing on whiteboards, we want them iterating, we want design sprints happening, and we want project-based learning. So we've moved away from the sage on the stage model of pedagogy, and we really want faculty to be facilitators and be the guide on the side. So let me stop there before I dive into the actual courses. There's 10 courses that look unlike any other gen ed you'll find. They're all required. There is no choice. And they all start with how-to titles,
Huh.
making outcomes explicit for the student.
I really like that approach, especially the beginning with the end in mind, with the whether it's leadership or interpersonal acumen. This is what you're going for. And then the thinking about the delivery model and the focusing on experiential learning. I think that's really such a positive direction. Let's hear the
Yeah.
10 courses with
Yeah, and for
snappy
sure. And by
names.
the way, those 5 outcomes, SFBU is surrounded by the biggest and the best companies in the world. Like
Mhm.
Google's down the street, Apple, Meta, Tesla, they're all in our backyard. And we have validated these with the industry and asking, like, hey, when our students graduate, what do you want them to be able to do? And the answer is not art history. And I say this as a person who has degrees in the arts. I know you do too. They are looking for tenacious leaders and they are looking for people who are interpersonally gifted, able to navigate global contexts, all these things. So the typical gen ed that's out there assumes that the student will take the implicit lesson of read these great books and then use them to become an enlightened thinker. And unfortunately, I don't think students are able to make that jump. So we've made the outcome of each class explicit to the student. We've mashed up the traditional kind of liberal arts and sciences in an interdisciplinary way, in a kind of a multi-hyphenate way to help the students. So let me just bang through them here for you. The first class they take is called How to Tell Your Story. And this takes your typical composition and rhetoric class and mixes it with storytelling. And we get at that kind of interpersonally gifted, enlightened thinker. We want students to be able to obviously communicate both in written form and in oral form, but it's more than that, right? There's more technical competence that students need. So they need to be able to tell their story. And by the way, all 10 of these courses from the design phase up have AI incorporated into them. So it's not AI as a tack on afterthought, like a lot of universities are doing now and coming up with some kind of AI policy. These courses were designed with AI in them. You'll use AI in this way for this assignment. You will not use it for these assignments. And here's how to do it. And here's how to work with it ethically and responsibly. So how to tell your story, how to design. I know we've talked about this, how to design your personal and professional life. This
Love it.
is up design thinking from the Stanford Design School and life design with like personal epistemology. They're reading Plato and Socrates, and then they're trying to find their way through what might be a midlife crisis at the age of 18 and map out their entire life journey. How to communicate in a global context is obviously a communication class, but it's also an intercultural competency class where students will learn how to work in intercultural teams and how to communicate across them. If you go to work at Google, you're probably going to be working with 5 people not from the United States. And so that's a really important skill.
And your manager is probably going to be in another city too.
Or another country.
Or another country.
How to lead, transforming history into modern movements. So we're taking history and we'll go all the way back to Marcus Aurelius and Julius Caesar, all the way through Colin Kaepernick, right? Like, how do you take leadership and form a social movement to motivate people to change? How to use math in real life, the mathematical mindsets that shape our world. And we're working with Jo Boaler, who's a Stanford professor who wrote a book called Mathish. And she's an amazing subject matter expert. How your brain works is some behavioral psychology mixed with neuroscience. And we're working with an Oxford-trained German neuroscientist named Jan Schnoop, and also my former colleague, Cindy Burnett, who's a creativity expert. And we're mashing those things together. How to be creative in partnership with computation and machine learning. So here is a class explicitly focused on creativity and artificial intelligence. How to use data science and game thinking for social impact. Game thinking and statistics, and how do those numbers and large data sets translate to society and make a difference for people. And then
Wow,
the last
that's
two,
data science for social impact is just such a nice
it's
uh
right. It's not data science for data science's
yeah,
sake.
you can see the applicability and the allure of that. Sorry to cut you off, but
That's
that one
okay.
really
That's
struck
okay.
me.
Yeah, thanks. And then the last two classes as capstones to the Gen Ed are how can we thrive the future of sustainability? And so this is a very forward-looking class that obviously looks at sustainability from every lens, be it financial, environmental, societal, technological. And then the final class is how to design social innovation, where students actually have to start their own social movement. And it's really an interesting array of 10 classes that I think will lead students to those 5 outcomes of being a tenacious leader, interpersonally gifted, global navigator, tech trendsetter, and enlightened thinker in a way that your grandpa's Gen Ed probably just can't do. You won't find another Gen Ed experience like this out there in higher ed. And I really think, as a product of a really robust liberal arts education myself, I think this is like liberal arts 2.0. I think this is the nouveau liberal arts that we should be teaching our students to get them to the outcomes, or something like this that will get them to the outcomes that I think they need and that employers really want.
I love it. The outcome driven, the how to framing, the embedding AI as opposed to tacking it on. I'm curious, you mentioned you vetted and validated with industry. Tell us a little bit about how these 10 courses came to be.
Yeah. So
I'm sure there was a lot of faculty committee meetings, but
there actually weren't. There were
oh, really?
shockingly few. We have very lean governance structures here. We do have a faculty assembly, but it is agile and lean. In fact, SFBU is one of the first institutions in the United States to actually teach a class in blockchain. There's a professor who teaches here part-time, also teaches at San Jose State, absolutely fine institution down the road, leaders in technology. And he was proposing a blockchain class there, and it sat in committee for 2 years. And he proposed it here, and the next semester we put it in the catalog. And so we can move very quickly.
Nice.
Yeah, yeah. Which I think serves students, right? If you say you're student-centered, the world is changing so quickly right now, Elliot, like with AI, that we
Yeah.
can't wait 2 years to stand up new classes.
It's hard to be student-centered and be slow at the same time.
Correct.
It's almost impossible.
They are
You might
Yeah.
you might say. So so not a lot of meetings,
Not a
but
lot of meetings. And we hired this brilliant curriculum architect from Texas named Tracy Clark. She actually wrote a lot of the K-12 curriculum for the state of Texas. She, like all of us, were slightly disgruntled with education, K-12 education, and the outcomes that we were having. And we worked directly with her to develop the framework and the outcomes and validate the outcomes and really build the steel structure of this, if you will. And now it's my job to actually execute on this strategy. So I'm still working with Tracy. She is, now that the classes are actually rolling out, she's here checking the fidelity of what's happening in the classroom to what was really on paper and supporting the faculty who are implementing these courses. And we're still building kind of the back half. So the first half of these classes rolled out this year. The back half are in design right now to roll out next year. And she's working with subject matter experts really from all over the world. We have folks in Toronto and Hong Kong and New York and Texas and Colorado, every corner of the globe. A lot of folks from Stanford. And these people are the best. They are the best in this very niche area of, say, life design, or how math works in the real world, or how your brain works. And we believe that this curriculum, just to give you an example, that a syllabus for any one of these classes is probably 75 pages. And every assignment has a rubric that has been validated. Every lesson has very specific outcomes that the instructor needs to teach to. So it's really almost like an instructor agnostic course, unlike a typical teach art history, not to pick on art. I'll pick on music, my discipline, not yours.
Sure.
Yeah, like here's a music history syllabus with just bare bones pre and post 1750. teach the style periods, get the major composers, and you have the ability to pick and choose and assess as you want. Here, it's completely done at the design phase to ensure that there's fidelity to what we intended. And all 10 of these classes work together as a jigsaw puzzle to get the students to the outcomes. Unlike the typical gen ed where the faculty own their piece of it.
Yeah, depending on which section you're in, you may get a
wildly different,
yeah.
and it's siloed.
Yeah.
Students don't have a holistic experience. It's almost like giving them jigsaw puzzle pieces and not showing them the picture on the cover of the box. Students don't know how your art history class connects to your biology class. It may not. Here, all 10 of these classes are working in harmony to lead students to the outcome. We're proud of it. It's been a privilege to get this thing stood up here. And like I said, once we get these 90 credit degrees approved, it'll be a third of every undergraduate student's experience at SFBU.
That's amazing. Well, you're ticking all the boxes in terms of forward thinking. You've got the experiential learning piece, you've got the industry engagement, you've got the design thinking, you've got the 90 credits.
There's some more cool stuff, Elliot. If we have time, I could share.
Is in your bag of tricks.
So all classes are capped at 20 students. We want experiential learning at SFBU. And so we've capped classes at 20 students. Dirty secret in higher ed, we don't train faculty how to teach. Faculty are amazing experts in their little sub-discipline of whatever, but nowhere I was a professor for forever, and I never really was taught how to teach. So we have a Center for Empowerment and Pedagogical Innovation with a chief learning officer who ensures that faculty have a tightly coupled pedagogy. And there's a model and a framework that they all get called the PERS model: personalized, experiential, relational, and student-centered. And so faculty are all approaching the pedagogy through the same lens. We have free textbooks for all of our classes, not just the gen ed. All classes have free textbooks. And we have AI tutors that have been trained in the entirety of the content of the gen ed. You can go home after class and open up your AI tutor, say, Elliot, what did you learn today? And you'll say, well, we learned about supply and demand. And I'll say, what's an example of that? And you'll say gasoline, the price of gasoline, supply, demand. And it'll keep asking you questions. It's Socratic. It doesn't give you the answers like ChatGPT. It just keeps asking you questions, and it's looking for certain key concepts. And if you miss something, it'll say, you got about 80% of that right, Elliot. Why don't you go back to page 50 and just reread that one page, and then let's talk again. And so what we on the back, that's a partnership we have with Alma Learning, ALMA. Alma Learning built us these tutor bots that have the entire syllabus. They have every lecture, every YouTube video, every podcast, every piece of content is preloaded in, and it's a closed system. So it won't go out and scrape the internet and hallucinate. It just knows what we fed it. And what we get on the back end is, some students are struggling with this one concept. We may need
supply and demand or whatever it might be.
Yeah, just swing back and let's hit that again. And I don't know a lot of other institutions that are doing that in a really meaningful way. We're proud of all of this stuff. We're really trying to spend our resources in a way that gets students across the finish line and make sure they have a very meaningful experience.
Well, it certainly sounds like you're setting them up for success, and you're really thinking about all the things that are changing in higher ed and creating a new model in terms of access and affordability and AI and all these great innovations. I guess my final question is just thinking about, how does this scale? Because it does seem like you're setting yourself up to scale, right? Where you have tutor bots and you have a 75-page syllabus and you've got all the rubrics and you're ready to rock. How are you going to maintain the magic as you scale up?
There is a plan to scale. I can't openly discuss, exactly what that looks
I imagine it goes up. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Right now, what we're doing here is really proof of concept. As you mentioned, we're extremely affordable. Tuition's about $10,000, and we scholarship on average 70 to 80% of that. My phone bill costs more than these students are paying for this really great educational experience. We want to show that we can have better outcomes than the one I referenced earlier. And we have a large international population, but we're growing our domestic population, which is starting to be pretty sizable. And the domestic population are largely historically underrepresented, first generation, Pell eligible, all the multi-factor at-risk students that you would normally see retaining fall to fall at about 30%. And we're doing closer to 90%. The initial litmus test on this is very good. And we know as a challenger brand, we know that there are students right now in higher ed who are either unserved or underserved by the typical model. So we want to go find those students. We're not trying to be the biggest or the best in our vertical. We're not trying to be Stanford or Berkeley or any of our amazing neighbors, San Jose State. We're trying to serve students right now who are not served or not well served by the typical models. Neurodivergent students, at-risk students, English as a second language student, we're really set up to serve those students well. And I think, at least in California and beyond, there is the opportunity to scale pretty quickly.
And what's the delivery model? A lot of times when people say all the things you've just said, they go immediately to online asynchronous.
Yeah, we are moving to online asynchronous. We don't currently have that, but we are moving in that direction pretty rapidly. In fact, for fall, we're putting 2,000 students in Indonesia in like a 3+1 partnership that will be online. And we're super excited about that partnership. And we think that there's a domestic market for that as well. So we're putting the products together, and AI is a big piece of it. And we believe it's the future, and we're leaning all the way into it.
That's great. It seems like you're leaning in a really exciting and interesting direction. And I really appreciate all the insights about how to reimagine Gen Ed and the student experience for the future. Thanks, Brad.
Yeah, thank you, Elliot. Great conversation. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Connected College podcast. Subscribe to my Connected College newsletter at elliottfelix.com for insights and excerpts from my upcoming book, tools you can download, and special offers. You can also find more information about talks I've given, articles I've written, and upcoming events there. And please support the podcast by rating and reviewing it wherever you're listening. Let's create connected colleges where students will succeed.